welcome back. We're so happy to have you. I want to start a little bit just talking about your beginning at Cornell. So you started at Cornell in '89. You left in '93. When you were there, did you think of yourself as becoming an entrepreneur?
No,
And-
absolutely not.
And what did you think you were going to do?
So I'm from a small town in northeast Wisconsin. I grew up, the town was 8,000 people and was surrounded by farm communities. And I thought I was a city kid because I was from a town of 8,000 people versus like 200. And when I went to Cornell, it was by far the most like eye-opening experience for me, right? It's funny that the discussion about agriculture, and I think of myself as a hayseed, so hopefully you can, figure out a way to redesign that, Ponzi. But the reality is that going to Cornell, my world just opened up, and so I knew farmers and I knew people who worked in a small town, right? Like I knew the mayor, and so my exposure to entrepreneurs was largely, small shopkeepers and a friend of ours who owned the local gas station and, people that own a bar or a restaurant. And it's funny because I never thought of them as entrepreneurs. I just thought of them as people in our community. By the way, for those that watched the 60 Minutes episode a few weeks ago about the swingiest county in the country,
It was yours?
It's where I grew up, yeah. And so it's a fascinating place to grow up. But I went to Cornell, and I'll never forget my senior year of college. My dad's career advice to me. I was interviewing with Solomon Brothers. I was interviewing with investment banks and some trading companies, and I told my dad, I'm going to take this trip to Wall Street to interview with these companies, and he's like, "Whoa, that's like that could be pretty risky." You might want to consider, going to work for a company like Procter and Gamble or Philip Morris or one of the big CPG companies. He goes, because they're going to have good benefits. And so his mindset, and the mindset, frankly, I think of so many people was, find a safer path. And that's what I did to start. And it was miserable.
Well, it's interesting we'll get to that in a second, but my hometown was 6,000 people.
Yeah.
Upstate New York. I was talking to Liza about this because they have a place up in Hudson, which is not far from where I live. And her husband's the town judge, and my dad was the town judge. It's like one night a week, traffic court and putting people in jail overnight. I mean, it was like the funniest thing ever. So I can relate to that also. One blinking light in our town.
Yeah.
And here we are today. Okay, so I would like you to give a summary of your work experience before Village MD, because it really does not paint a path of what you're doing now. And I want you to do this because not just for the students, but also for some of the adults who are still learning. Well, I should say older adults who are still learning. I always like to tell people who ask, which are mostly students in my case, because I work at the university, that there's not one path.
Yeah.
Right. Except maybe investment banking. And I always make a joke about it like you just did. And but there's not one path. Right. Yeah. So tell us what you did when you left Cornell in 1993 and then up through basically 20 years later until you founded Village.
Yeah. So it's funny. I'm glad you asked the question, Zach, because I will say not only is there not just one path, but for the students in the audience, if there's anything that I hope you could take away from our conversation today, is you do not need to know the answer right now. Slow the hell down. I would usually say a different word for hell, but just slow down, enjoy your ride, go do things, experience things, develop skills, learn along the way, and you will have your path present itself to you. And you're going to have the paths presented all along the way, and choose some and ride them for as long as you'd like, choose others, and don't be in such a rush. Just enjoy the time that you have in school, learn as much as you can, meet great people. You're surrounded by some of the most interesting people in the world, and they're only going to get more interesting the older you get. and you're going to come to presentations and you're going to see a founder and CEO give a presentation. You're going to be inspired by that person. And so just slow down a little bit, please. So my path, because my dad's career advice, and I was sort of, I got, convinced that maybe I should go the route of working for a big company in a management training program. I took a job for Philip Morris USA. And why did I take that job? Because it paid me $500 more than all the other jobs that I had, right? So $26,500 was my opening bid. And so I took this job, not having any idea what to think of it. For those who don't know, Philip Morris USA is Marlboro cigarettes. So my first job out of college, here I am.
You were a big smoker in college?
Not really. I mean, I had a good time, but not really. More like late night smokes than anything else. And so here I am, 22 years old, ironically enough, living in Marlboro, Massachusetts, driving a Chevy Astrovan, $3,000 worth of cigarette inventory in the back, and all kinds of like Parliament Light neon signs to like go and hang up at grocery stores and gas stations, et cetera. And it was just miserable. I thought this is not the right thing for me. And I came to this realization of like, what the hell am I doing, right? Like, this is not the right thing.
After how long?
Oh, it was like 4 months into the job, and you start to realize, not to get too much into the weeds, but we had to sell like promotions and things like that, and I'd have people that own chains of gas stations or convenience stores that would tell me that they're actively trying to market cigarettes to high school kids. I'm like, and so here I am, 22 years old, arguing with this guy who's like, considered a good client of Philip Morris. And I'm thinking, this is not who I am. Like, I can't live with this sort of orientation. So, ironically enough, I had reached out to a professor whose name is Lois Schertz-Willett. Lois was on faculty at Cornell, and I credit her with kind of helping me change my orientation while I was at Cornell around like the importance of just diving in academically. And I'm like, I'm trying to think about what I should do. What do you think? And she said, well, have you ever thought about becoming a PhD? And so I talked to her. I talked to Doc Applin, a few others, if you remember. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to apply to business school, and from there I'll make a decision whether I get an MBA and then go work, or whether I go and pursue a PhD. I ended up deciding to get an MBA and then go work. I worked in consulting. Really didn't love the work in consulting, right? And this is all about like what you learn about yourself, right? So hence the point about going out and having a lot of different experiences. For some people, consulting's the most fascinating thing in the world, right? My wife is an amazing consultant, did innovation design consulting for years. She's so good. For me, I didn't like it. Like I wanted to know that like decisions I was making, and I was going to have to live with the impact. I wanted to I felt like I was, you're coaching as opposed to wanting to be on the field and playing the game. And so I left there. I had a buddy from business school who brought me into a telecom company. And so in 1996, the telecommunications industry deregulated. And so you had these, they're called CLECs, competitive local exchange carriers. And so you had all these little tiny telephone companies that were popping up. And I joined a company that was an early stage that had been successful in the UK. And they were looking for someone to come in and be the general manager of two companies they just bought in Chicago. One was a bankrupt CLEC. The other was a startup internet service provider, right? So back in the day when you spend $9.99 per month for dial-up internet, and they asked me to do it, and the first thought was like, how ridiculous that they're asking me. I know nothing about either of these industries to come in and do this, and I did it, and it was so fun. It was so fascinating, just to have the opportunity to learn and to grow and to hire and to fire and. Like you're faced, like, and you can laugh, but like the reality is, like, I guarantee you, survey 100 entrepreneurs. They're going to tell you they generally do not fire people fast enough, right? They're too quick to hire and too slow to fire. You're going to hear that time and time again. Those who are entrepreneurs are all nodding their heads. And that's part of the reality. And you only learn that when you're like in the middle and you're having to, in one case, turn around a company. I had to learn how to manage a call center and get a call center. Like we never collected a bill in like a year and 6 months. And so suddenly we're training call center folks on how to collect outstanding bills, and you make it fun. You learn how to motivate people and create incentive. And so that was a really cool experience, such that it made me realize I want to go out and start my own company. So I started a company. It was called Evo Knowledge. It was based on the evolution of knowledge was the orientation. It was a Benjamin Franklin quote: "Knowledge is not knowledge until shared." And the idea we had, this is late 90s, was to go out and to sit down and interview people who were tremendously successful and to actually create programmatic learning out of it, right?
Sounds like an early version of a podcast.
Well, so it's, masterclass or others.
Yeah.
So we had a view of doing that. And I self-funded the business. Every dollar I had ever saved up until that point in time in my life, I put into that business. Eventually closed the business down, sold it for like 3 cents, but lost every dollar I put into it, right? But the learnings I had from that experience were just off the charts. And it's funny because people talk about, sometimes timing matters especially when you're doing something that is new and different and others haven't done it before. And I started this company after the dot-com bubble had crashed, right? So access to venture capital, et cetera, was pretty thin, right? So we self-funded for a long time. And then we had, some interesting people that invested as angels. And I'll never forget, at one point in time, we had a venture firm that was going to invest $1 million in the business, but they wanted 40% of it. And it's interesting, right? Because we eventually said no, which was the wrong decision. But we, like myself and I brought in a couple of other guys, and we sort of controlled most of the business. And it was like, we're going to lose the control and yada, yada, yada. And there's all these provisions they wanted around governance. And it was like, all right, we're giving up control. Is that what we want to do? And we made the decision, no. It was, again, it's a bad decision. Probably should have taken it. But it was great learning. Yep. And so from there, I started a couple of other companies, pretty small companies. And then along the way, I had a college roommate who was doing work at Blue Shield of California. And he called me and he said, hey, I know you're liking this entrepreneurial path, but you haven't made money in, like, as far as I can tell, in like 5 or 6 years, and you've got a kid on the way. So do you want to come do some work?
I'm really glad that Stephanie was doing consulting.
Yeah, me too. And I'm, eternally grateful that she has, along this crazy journey, she supported every step along the way. And this guy said, we'd like for you to come in and do some consulting work in healthcare around congestive heart failure. And of course, I know nothing about congestive heart failure, but I hope one of the things you all picked up from the conversation that Ponzi talked about is ask questions, right? Like if there's a skill you do not have, if you're not good at asking questions, and you're not good at listening and asking follow-on questions and follow-on questions and follow-on questions, learn that skill. You want to be an entrepreneur and you can't do that, I don't think you're going to be very successful. So for me, it was a matter of going in and learning how to just ask a lot of questions. I didn't even know what congestive heart failure was, right? So what is congestive heart failure? What's a primary care physician? What's a HMO versus a PPO, right?
Hey,
so
what was your major in college?
I was agricultural economics.
Okay, I got
Dyson now,
okay,
right?
Okay.
So the reality for me was that I went into this to Blue Shield of California, and because I had been an entrepreneur and because I had learned to just keep asking questions and learn how to peel back the layers of the onion, it became obvious to me that there was a really big opportunity in healthcare that I felt like people were not taking advantage of, right? And I came to realize that the US healthcare system is this giant behemoth that we spend, $5 trillion per year on. We have outcomes that are a little bit better than third world nations. We have a system that fundamentally incentivizes people, providers, pharma, everybody, to do more to people instead of drive to better outcomes. And it was, it didn't take me a long time to be there to realize that that was an opportunity, and that the physicians who are the heart and soul of this healthcare system, people who decide to commit their lives to improve the lives of others, were being treated so poorly. There was not investment going into the way care is being delivered, that eventually it just became such an overwhelming thing that I said, I've got to commit the rest of my career.
And did your friend from Cornell start Village with you?
No.
So he stayed at Blue Cross or
No,
something?
Charlie ended up going to Microsoft.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you decide, let's start a medical practice.
Well, so not, no, I had it, well, sorry, I fast forwarded too much, sorry. People are assuming you're getting bored at some point. I left Blue Shield of California. I left Blue Shield of California, and I joined a company that, the Medicare Modernization Act was signed into law in December of 2003. And the Medicare Modernization Act was a change to the way that the government was going to fund private Medicare insurance. The way it was done historically is that the government would pay insurance companies the same rate, regardless of the acuity of the patients. So just think about that. An insurance company gets the same amount of reimbursement every month, whether you're a healthy 65-year-old who's running marathons, or you're 95 years old and you're on your deathbed. That doesn't seem right, but that's the way the insurance game worked back then. So you can imagine, what did insurance companies do back then? Insurance companies would host marketing events to inform you of what the benefits were, and they'd hold a marketing event on the third floor of a 3-story building with no elevator. Do not think I'm joking when I say that, because if you can get up the stairs, then you're going to be healthy enough to be insured. They would pay brokers, insurance, the people who sell the insurance, they'd pay them more incentive and reward for people who stayed on longer, people who were healthier, right? So the whole system was absolutely screwed up. A guy by the name of Tom Scully, who was the head of CMS, had enough foresight and recognition of how the industry worked to say, we've got to change that. We're going to start to pay insurance companies based upon the documented acuity of each individual, so that if the total average we pay is $1,000 per beneficiary per month, you might only pay $400 for that healthy 65-year-old. You might spend $3,000 for the sicker person.
Yeah.
When that legislation came out is when I had my most significant aha moment, which was, not only was I realizing all the problems with the system, but I was realizing that now there was a pathway for the system to work more rationally, and more rationally defined as healthcare providers should be paid based on outcomes, not based on the volume of the service you provide. So if there's an opportunity to provide really good care for people who need it, and there's now more resources being provided to provide that care, then you're better off to create a better outcome, right? So I ended up going from Blue Shield. I joined an insurance company that our model was to go out and build what are called IPAs, independent physician, think of it as an independent physician network, and then build an insurance product on top of that. And that was my lab. That was my lab to realize that we can meaningfully change the outcomes for patients if you provide enough information, technology, and resource at the point of care for physicians, so that instead of physicians living in a world where they react to whoever they find behind the exam room door, but actually a model that is trying to use data and technology to predict when people are going to have adverse events and to get in front of those events in a way that's done in a very supportive and loving way where we wrap our arms around patients so that at the end of the day, we're not, if someone wants to, if they're 80, they have COPD and they smoke, and we try to convince them to stop smoking, and they tell us to pound sand, that's that person's prerogative, right? But for the person who is 80, that smoked for 50 years, that wants to stop, that maybe wants to live to 90 to see their great grandkids, we now have a model where we can work with them and engage with them and be with them beyond just the four walls of the clinic, but be with them in a way that they get
Yeah.
on a better path to health.
So that experience gave you direct exposure to doctors?
That gave me,
Right.
that I was building, networks of
Right.
physicians and working with physicians all over the country to realize that this was not just a problem in Houston, Texas, or in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
But urban communities, rural communities, this problem exists exactly the same everywhere.
Yep.
And it made me realize that there's a scalable solution that can be out there to actually bring doctors together, to change the way they get paid, and to do it in a way where they feel better supported, and that we can, create a more sustainable primary care delivery
Yeah.
system in this
So
country.
so it's funny, every time we talk, I feel like I learn more about
Yeah.
not just medicine practice and how screwed up it is, but just about your own motivations, which I just think are fantastic. So what gave you the confidence to think that you, Tim Berry and team,
Yeah.
could actually stand up medical practices? And tell us how you picked geographic regions and
Yeah.
like what made you think you could do it?
Yeah. I loved your question earlier. And I think, a part of it I'd say is in spite of my dad's career advice of going to, get benefits, I was also raised with an orientation of if it is to be, it's up to me. I watched the town I grew up in did not have a lot of sports for girls in grade school and middle school. And my dad said, screw that. And he brought other dads and teachers and everyone together. And the next thing you know, there was a proliferating, sports program for girls. So I just had this exposure of if you want to change something, go and do it, right? And I think part of it was, I personally believe you have to have a set of hypotheses, right? And I think you have to will them to work.
Yep.
Right? And so when I first started off working with doctors, the first question is, are you a doctor? No, I'm not. So whatever they might think about, any docs in the room?
Couple?
You can probably attest to this. But you sit down with an administrator and your first thought is, okay, well, they're not a doctor, so they're kind of down here on the totem pole. Right? And so your starting point is here. You're not a doc. So you've got to figure out ways to work yourself up to be able to have a meaningful conversation. And for me, it was just a matter of I would see patients with our doctors. We have docs that go out and deliver care in the home. I go out and I do that. And I try to understand what it is they do, their life, the challenges, how do we make life better? And I think that when people, and my business is a people business, right? We don't sell a seed product, right? So how do you ultimately build culture, build trust, build credibility that we're trying to do the right thing for patients? And I think when you do that, you start to build up that credibility. But at the same time, it's one of the things I love about physicians is that they're both, they're artists, they're scientists, and they have the biggest hearts in the world. And so to sit down and say, okay, the care that's being provided to our patients that have COPD, right? Let me show you, for people who have COPD, for people that have CHF, they represent 50% of the total medical spend in the Medicare population. It's 10% of the population,
Wow.
50% of the total spend. And so you then you bring, you take the claims data, right, insurance claims data, and you bring out the facts of the progression of what's happening in this individual's life. And it's not hard to get people who are scientific, who are artists, who have big hearts to say, yeah, that's like, it's not working. But what can I do? Okay, well, let's do that, right? So for us, a big part of it is, a big part for me was having the chance to partner with a doctor who's one of my co-founders, love him to death. And we've done a lot of piloting over a lot of years, even before we started Village, to know that there's things that we can do for patients that are going to lead to better outcomes. And then from there, it's about bringing it to a smaller set of docs and docs who want to make an impact.
Yep.
And then from there, it's about bringing it out to others. And so it kind of becomes this cascading effect.
Where did you guys start? Like, where was your first practice?
Started in Houston, Texas.
And why'd you pick
Eight
that? Is that where your
doctors.
founder was
That's
from?
where, yeah.
Okay.
So Dr. Clive Fields, who's one of my co-founders, he had his medical practice, 8 doctors on the west side.
And standing up a medical practice, we have to pay people. Obviously, you need physical infrastructure, equipment, buildings. How did you afford it? Did you fundraise at that point?
So I'm a big believer in, as a founder, in self-funding the business for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be forever, but I think there's nothing better than having really sweaty palms of like, man, I gotta deliver and I have to execute. And I think you develop such a keen, it's almost like for those of you that do cold immersion therapy, I take a cold shower every morning. Like when that cold water comes on, your eyes just get really big. You get super focused. And I think I liken it to that. Like that's a 24 state of mind.
Yep.
So we self-funded for a little while. And then from there, we went out and started raising capital from angels, friends and family.
Yep.
And by this point in time, the three of us, I had another co-founder, the three of us that had significant careers in healthcare, right? So I was turning down CEO jobs that would have paid 7 figures per year to have the opportunity to
do this yourself.
To do this myself.
Yeah. So Houston, then you expanded. How many areas are you in now?
So we at our height, we got to, and this is an interesting part of the story, we got to 22 markets total. We've subsequently shrunk our footprint, which is maybe a whole nother story and a whole nother day, but we're in 16 markets today, about 4,100 doctors. We do about just shy of $7 billion in revenue.
Okay, which is incredible. So let's talk about Walgreens. So we've already talked about Walmart. Let's talk about Walgreens. Explain what happened, how they first got involved, what their vision was for Village.
Yeah. So Walgreens had many of you familiar with Minute Clinic, CVS Minute Clinic? Sorry, I think of myself as a plain-spoken person. I'm not a fan of that model of healthcare. It's sort of, hey, we've got an open storage closet in the back of this pharmacy. Let me put a doctor's exam table in there and we'll provide care. Walgreens had its own version of that. And it wasn't successful, like the Minute Clinic model is not successful financially. And so they came to us, and we had been growing and expanding, and they said, hey, what if we sold all these clinics to you? And we said, no, thanks. We don't think it's great healthcare. We have a different idea if you want to explore that. And we had friends that were senior executives at Walgreens. And so we knew of the challenges that they had in their stores, right? Amazon's continuing to compete against them and take share away from the front end of their stores. And we know that the pharmacy benefit management companies, the PBMs, were continuing to squeeze down margin on their pharmacy business. Then you have the like Hims and Hers of the world that were taking some of the higher margin drugs away from them. So we knew that their business was sort of under attack. And so we said, we think that there could be a model whereby we basically bulldoze about 40% of one of your stores, and we put up a full service primary care clinic. And they hemmed and we started having these conversations, as you know, with big companies don't happen in like 2 weeks.
Right.
So these conversations were happening over the course of months and months and months. And eventually they decided to pilot this. They thought, you know what, it's interesting enough. And they looked at, for them, they looked at the pharmacy referral patterns of our doctors, and they're like, well, this could be really good for us, right? So, so we opened up 5 pilot locations. And at the 5 pilot locations, they were all tremendous successes.
Were they scattered across the country, or were
We
they?
did Houston and Phoenix.
Okay,
So we picked 2 markets, and these were very successful clinics. Like we opened them up, and patients were coming in. You know, a lot of our patients who had been with these doctors for a long time. Like it was, I was blown away when because many of you may not realize, but the status of primary care clinics around this country, the physical structure of these clinics is pretty sad.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about carpet that's all torn up, a mismatch of furniture, usually like 27,000 pieces of paper taped to windows and walls. And it's not a physically pleasant experience. And it's largely because docs don't have the money to, frankly, invest themselves into that physical infrastructure. And so we built these clinics. They're beautiful, and have patients were coming in crying they couldn't get over, like they were going to now be seen in such a nice place. And a big part of what we did is, and continue to do, is all been focused on how do we help serve underserved communities. And part of the reality is that Walgreens saw the success of these first 5, and they got religion and said, we need to do more of this, and this could be the transformative change that we need as a company, because the 2 other parts of our business are frankly under attack. Yeah. And so we went from 5 clinics where they made a $75 million investment in us, to announcing that we were going to open up, you know, a few hundred of these. And that followed with a $1 billion investment, and their stock price had a nice bump when on that news, and it gave them something to talk about, and the street really liked that as a sort of thought about what the future strategy of their organization can be. And as we continued to roll these clinics out, we got to a point where we were opening up a new clinic somewhere around the country every 73 hours. It got to a point where they said,
like Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. It got to a point where they said, you know what, we're afraid that, you know, United Healthcare or someone is going to come in and buy the business. We talked at the time about going public, and instead they made an offer to become our control shareholder. So they ended up buying. They spent $5.2 billion to buy 63% of the business.
Yeah, and that allowed a lot of your original investors, or maybe all of them, to cash out.
Not entirely. Everyone sold something.
Yep.
So founders, management, investors sold something and then rolled the rest.
Yeah. So this was a huge moment for, obviously, you personally and
Yep.
your co-founders. Huge moment for your investors, probably for your employees.
Yeah.
And you thought that this was going to likely result in them probably buying the rest of the company, or keeping things moving on in an upward direction. What actually happened?
So it's been an interesting ride, right?
Yeah.
And I would tell you that when we were growing at the pace of opening up a new clinic every 73 hours, it was we were growing at an unsustainable pace, and you know, it was we had no problem standing up the physical building. We had no problem recruiting doctors, really great doctors. But there's a reality that when we were going into so many new markets to keep up this pace, that in the markets that we were in, we were enjoying this success. The markets that we were going into, we'd go into the market, and the hospital systems in those markets viewed us as a complete competitive threat. And so when we would recruit a doctor, say you're working for, a health system in Tampa, and we recruit you, you decide to leave. In our other markets, you would leave, and the hospital leadership would know that even though you were leaving the hospital system to come to us, that they would still get the referrals. Because at the end of the day, it's what they
Right.
care about, right? I mean, we can all be honest. Like, hospitals make money when people are admitted.
Yeah.
That's how their business model works. They're incentivized and want for people to be hospitalized, right?
Yeah.
So, or surgeries done at their hospitals. So the reality is that for us, in the markets where we have a presence, a doc comes to us and the hospital knows that we're going to still have a good relationship. When we go into a new market, they're worried that that all the referrals, we're going to take those away, right? And so what would happen is we recruit you, you'd go resign, and the hospital system would say, leave today. So not giving you the chance to talk to your patients and tell them where they're going, have continuity of care, et cetera. It was just leave today. And the hospital would then try to reschedule all the patients, and they'd say, Dr. Schulman is no longer with us. He's left the area. He won't be there to take care of you. And so you would leave because you've been now asked to leave. Well, I was planning on you resigning,
And taking some
having a
patients.
thoughtful transition, et cetera. I've now got to pay you, 2 or 3 months of salary I wasn't planning on. You're now showing up with 0 patients as opposed to a full panel of patients. And so for us, there was, the capital needed to grow at the pace we were, was just so significant, right? And at this time, we also have a control investor who admittedly doesn't have the capital to invest in the way that they thought, partly because of what had been playing out in the business model. Part of it was just the nature of their operations, right? So we found ourselves in a position with, someone who has come to the realization that the capital that's going to be required to make this happen is more than what they bargained for, right? And more than necessarily what would make sense for them in the context of their overall strategic direction. And so, so we ended up having to live in this hard reality of knowing that we were opening up these clinics, and these clinics that have this incredible opportunity for growth, but we're never going to have the chance to see them come to fruition because the capital base is not necessarily there.
So when Walgreens closes the spigot, I mean, I'm just trying to use an analogy that will people understand. What happens? I mean, so now they don't want
You're forced to make some really hard decisions.
Yeah, and you're going through that now. And
I mean, Walgreens has been public that they are looking to sell their position in Village. Now, does that mean they're going to sell all of it, sell part of it, spin out? I mean, there's a 100 different configurations that this could take. And there's a reality that we're sort of sorting through what that is. The most immediate was to realize that, you have to make hard decisions. And that as much as as the founder of the business, know that our model works, I describe our business in many ways like being in the orange production business. You have to plant a tree, you have to fertilize and grow that tree, and you have to let oranges eventually develop. And if you're not willing to wait the full cycle time for the oranges to develop,
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Not going to work.
And so we had to make some really tough decisions. We exited out of markets. We closed a number of clinics. So it's been like I think about the lessons you learn on your entrepreneurial journey, right? And Ponzi said it earlier. It's hard. Like when we were opening up 73 clinics or a clinic every 73 hours, that was really hard. That was, you felt like you were 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing all you can just to keep up the pace, let alone trying to continue to build culture and training and a scalable model.
Yeah.
And then you have to make some really difficult decisions that you're closing markets, you're closing clinics. At the same time, you want to still build that trust and credibility with everyone else who's there, right? Like we at one point in time, we were over 20,000 employees, and that number has shrunk, but like we still have 17, 18,000 employees that you want to inspire and motivate every single day, because we are, in fact, changing the way care is being delivered, right? We, like last week, we had the pleasure, actually it was this week, had the pleasure of announcing that once again, we were one of the top performers in the REACH ACO model of healthcare, generating $140 million of savings off of, roughly 100,000 Medicare beneficiaries. I mean, the savings that we create for the system is because we deliver a better model of care, because people don't have to go to the ER, don't have to go to the hospital. And so, I'm now in this next chapter of running the business that is, it's an interesting one, because, in so many ways, I still want to act like the entrepreneur when we were, 8 doctors. At the same time, I have to also recognize that with the size of the employee base we have, things don't move as fast as I'd like. And
what percent are doctors of your employee base?
so there's like 4,100 doctors. So it's
a fourth or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We are definitely out of time for our talk, but let's have a couple of questions and then we'll hit lunch. I see one over here.
Tim, thank you so much for coming out.
Of course.
Really enjoyed hearing your perspective and your thoughts on why you set out to start Village MD in the first place. As a leader in your industry, what do you think can be done to address and mitigate the conflicts of interest in what can be such a top-down industry, when it can so often be the insurance companies that dictate not only your margins, but sometimes the care that you're able to deliver?
So that's a great question. I will tell you that from my lens, it's easy to vilify the insurance companies in the healthcare system. I would not, and I think that they are in fact part of the problem of our healthcare system, and part of it is that they are for the public insurance companies. When healthcare costs go up, their top line goes up. So if you're an investor in an insurance company, a public investor, and healthcare cost trend is going up by 7%, and you price your products off of that trend, you have continued built-in revenue increase. And when your admin fees are generally 1% of the revenue, which is the largest basis for your margin, then you're in fact generating more margin, right? And so I think, now with that said, I don't think there's anything stopping every healthcare provider in America from delivering the kind of care that we provide to our patients. It requires the courage to say, we're not going to just keep getting paid in this fee-for-service model. And there are plenty of opportunities to go out there working with the federal government on Medicare Advantage, working in the ACO models, and working in exchange populations, as well as their own employees, right? The largest employer in any given community around America is going to be the hospital system. There's nothing stopping them from saying, we want to change the outcomes that we have for people who need it, right? 20% of America has a chronic disease. 80% of the total medical spend in this country is tied to those 20% of people. So I think we have to have a really honest discussion about what does it take to deliver the best care you can imagine for that 1 in 5 Americans who have chronic disease. And the care that is required isn't one that happens just in a 15-minute exam visit. It requires lifestyle change. There's lots of, the prior conversation was really inspiring to me, because hopefully there comes a point in time where we're going to have conversation about food and food supply in the context of healthcare. underserved communities and the lack of access to fruit and vegetables, or even a grocery store for that matter. Like there's some significant issues that, today I don't think we're focused as much as we should be on ultimately those people who need our help the most. And that's the part that, frankly, I'm hoping that whether it's through Village MD or how I spend the rest of my life and career, is how do we keep shining a light so that we get focused on helping those who really need it. And by the way, like there's an enormous economic opportunity in doing that. But we have to be courageous, and you have to have the capital base, as we've learned. But you also have to, bring people along to make sure that what we have found is that when we do align incentives, the outcomes they're special. They're just really, really special.
Okay, one more over here.
Hi, thanks so much for coming to talk with us today. I'm a public health student at Cornell in my senior year in Cal's.
Nice.
And I actually had been—
Have you taken Sean's class, Nicholson?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
I took that one. I'm in another class called Economics of Healthcare Markets right now. I think it's the new head of the Sloan program who's teaching that.
Okay, super.
So a really cool class. And I'd been following actually the acquisition of Village MD by Walgreens since about 2021. So it's very cool to see all of that play out. Given the stuff that had happened, I want to ask sort of a two-part question. One, given how everything is played out with Walgreens sort of taking a step back, what is your financial / profitability and non-financial goals going ahead for Village MD? And the second part of the question is, are there any large lessons that you take away from the acquisition now 3 years down the line?
Yeah, so Walgreens is still our control investor, right? So they report on our financials. They are a public company, so you'll forgive me if I don't answer any questions specific to that. Outside of just saying, like for us, a big part, Tim Wentworth, who's a Cornell grad, is the now current CEO of Walgreens. Tim made a comment at one point in time of like, Village MD needs to go on a diet. And part of what he was suggesting was that we had been, we had been growing at this incredible pace and investing in the future, consistent with what we, said we would. But we had to, for us, we had to really kind of get real about what could be afforded in the context of the investment that we have from Walgreens. And that's what ultimately led us to say, for us, it's all about how do we continue to make sure that we deliver the best care we possibly can always, that we are a top performer in all the different types of value-based contracts that we have, but also that we're, that we're just driving to the faster profitability, right? So like, we have to do our part to make sure that we are, we were living in an environment where capital was extraordinarily cheap, effectively unlimited access to capital, not really, but effectively, and then going out and building. Now we're living in a constrained environment. Like anyone, how are you going to live in that environment knowing that the size of the prize that you're playing for hasn't really changed? The time frame you get there, you've got to rethink because you're going to be more limited, right? So for us, to sort of qualitatively answer your question about that. Forgive me, the second part of the question was just related to
Lessons learned.
Lessons learned. Yeah, it's really funny because I have this conversation with folks all the time, and what I would tell you is that if I look at it from the lens of my investors, it's hard to like the early investors when we sold to Walgreens. It was by far the best financial transaction that could have been done, right? I think that looking back on it, we probably should have pushed harder to slow down the growth. There's reasons to have continued the growth at the pace that we were. But at the same time, we knew that it was becoming unsustainable. And we pushed for that to happen, and we effectively, kept on the growth curve. But I would have pushed harder on that to slow things down, to effectively be in a spot where, like at the end of the day, what we have been able to prove across every clinic that we have is that patients continue to show up. We get more every month. We get more patients. The patients love the experience. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but by and large, if you look at our net promoter scores, they're off the charts, and the outcomes we generate are top tier. And so it's the biggest lesson learned for me was really around that. There's lots of other lessons that are inherent in, I think, any business. I'd say because we were at a hyper growth phase, one of the challenges that I know I found as the founder and CEO was really trying to figure out what's the level of talent that we need for the various stages that we have in the business. And we were very intentional about bringing in talent that was seemingly far greater than what we needed at the time. And even then we undershot. And I will tell you that, and again, as a founder, there's so many things you learn. And I'm a big believer always being upfront, honest, transparent with the team. But at the same time, when you're working with someone, you always want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I know that I've failed a number of times by not moving on some people faster. And I regret it. And I think that a lot of leaders you talk to, that when they're building up businesses, I mean, if you're 20 people as the founder, you can probably do it all yourself, right? Like, let's be honest. But when you get to 1,000 people and you're at 5,000 and you're at 10,000, like you can't do it all yourself. And really bringing in hardcore operators who frankly just know how to get shit done is one of the most important things that you can do. But also being realistic about what your skill set deficiencies are, really honest, and making sure that you're filling those in other people.
Great. Tim, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Excellent.